Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to this new episode of our History Titan series. As you do know, we step into the shadows of our past, where brilliance lies obscured by time. Today, we resurrect the legacy of those in our history who shaped our world but vanished from our collective memory. From the laboratories of unsung scientists to the dusty tomes of overlooked scholars, politicians, and social activists, we have traversed continents and centuries to unveil the extraordinary lives that history forgot. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, welcome to this new chapter of this series, where we generally unearth the giants of history, whose stories are often told in half-truth and shadows, or often overlooked by our academical history. Today we turn our gaze to Nelson Mandela, a titan whose legacy is as complex as the nation he helped to transform. Nelson Mandela was not just the symbol of freedom for South Africa, but a pragmatic leader who navigated the treacherous waters of apartheid and with a vision tempered by the harsh realities of power and compromise. We'll naturally step into the intricate world of South Africa's struggle, where Nelson Mandela's journey from a young lawyer to a global icon was marked by sacrifice, negotiation, and relentless pursuit of unity. His leadership was shaped not only by the fight against apartheid, but also by the support and solidarity of Pan-African nations and the inspiration drawn from fellow freedom fighters like Martin Luther King Jr. Nelson Mandela's story is one of courage and concession, a testament to the difficult balance between idealism and pragmatism in the quest for justice. Today, we'll try to remember Nelson Mandela not just as a hero, but as a man who understood that the path to freedom is often paved with compromise. His legacy challenges us to look beyond the myth and to appreciate the ongoing struggle for true equality and land justice in South Africa. This is the story of a titan who dared to dream, similarly to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., of a united nation, even when the dream demanded difficult choices. Then please follow me as we delve into the past of one of the greatest fighting South African hero of our history, who dedicated his life to getting freedom to South Africans and give freedom and give hope to all African nations and descendants. Everyone, on this introduction, what can we say? Okay, first of all, it will be the last episode of our Pan-Africanist twist of the History Titan series. We'll stop there. We'll do something else in the next episodes. Nonetheless, this episode on Nelson Mandela is the one I wanted to do first. But I wanted to wait for it in order to have the right angle, in order to capture the real approach I had in mind. So what I wanted to do in this episode on Nelson Mandela is to help us to confront the complex legacy of Nelson Mandela. Yes, indeed, he was a global icon of freedom whose compromises and concessions reshaped South Africa, but it left unfinished the revolution that many had hoped for. While Nelson Mandela's role in dismantling apartheid is undeniable, his presidency also preserved systemic inequalities, particularly around land ownership, to avoid civil war and international backlash. If you remember what happened to Haiti, this episode explores the contradictions in his leadership, the Pan-African alliances that sustain him, and the unresolved struggles that define South Africa today. So now let's tackle his early life and political awakening. Nelson Mandela was born in 1918 in the rural village of Mwezo in the Eastern Cape into the Tembu royal family. Raised under both traditional Xhosa customs and British colonial education, Nelson Mandela was exposed early to the injustices of racial segregation and dispossession. As a young man, he moved to Johannesburg, where the harsh realities of apartheid, past laws, forced removals, and economic exclusions shaped his political consciousness. And Nelson Mandela legal training gave him a unique perspective. He saw both the power and the limitations of the law in society built on institutionalized racism, the same that we could see in USA at the time of Martin Luther King Jr., especially on the South, due to racial segregation. He joined the African National Congress, ANC, in 1944, co-founding its Youth League and pushing for more radical, mass-based resistance. Influenced by global and anti-colonial movements and inspired by the likes of Mahatma Gandhi and later Martin Luther King Jr., Mandela's activism evolved from peaceful protest to armed struggle when it became clear that the apartheid regime would not yield to negotiation alone. His arrest in 1962 and subsequent life sentence at Robben Island turned him into a symbol of resistance. But during his 27 years in prison, Nelson Mandela's thinking matured. He realized that the path to liberation would require not just courage, but also negotiation, compromise, and an ability to see the world through the eyes of his adversaries. Now let's talk about the negotiated revolution and the compromise for peace. Nelson Mandela's release in 1990 marked the beginning of a delicate transition. South Africa was on the brink of civil war. The apartheid government, led by F.W. de Klerk, was under immense pressure from international sanctions and internal unrest. The ANC, while powerful, faced the reality of a heavily armed white minority, economic instability, and the threat of ethnic violence. Nelson Mandela's genius was his willingness to compromise for the greater good. He understood the lessons of Haiti. If you haven't seen the Haitian Revolution series that I've done in a couple of months ago, I will leave the link in the description of that episode. So Haiti was a nation that, after successful overthrowing of the French colonial rule, was punished with economic isolations and decades of instability by Western powers, unwilling to accept black sovereignty. Nelson Mandela feared that a radical transfer of power in South Africa, particularly through land expropriation and retributive justice, would provoke not only white resistance and bloodshed, but also international backlash that could cripple the new nation. Thus, Nelson Mandela and the ANC agreed to a negotiated settlement. First of all, political power, economic continuity. Black South Africans gained the right to vote and political representation, but the economic structure, land, mines, banks, remained largely in white hands. Land reform differed. The government adopted a willing seller, willing buyer approach, offering compensation to white landowners rather than immediate expropriation. This meant that even decades later, the vast majority of arable land remained under white ownership. Truth and reconciliation, but not retribution. Instead of adopting Nuremberg-style trials, like in Germany after the Second World War, South Africa established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where perpetrators of apartheid crimes could confess in exchange for amnesty. This avoided mass reprisals but left many victims without justice. Nelson Mandela's compromises were not universally popular. Many in the black community felt betrayed by the slow pace of economic transformation. Yet Mandela's approach averted civil war and set South Africa on the path of relative stability, earning him global acclaim as a peacemaker. So now let's look into the Pan-African solidarity and global alliances. Nelson Mandela's struggle was never isolated. Throughout his life, he drew strength and support from the broader Pan-African movement. Neighboring countries like Zambia, Tanzania, Mozambique, Angola, and Zimbabwe provided sanctuary, training, and logistical support to the ANC in exile, often at great cost to themselves. Nigeria, for example, imposed a Mandela tax on its citizens to fund the ANC, while the Organization of African Unity made apartheid South Africa a pariah state. Nelson Mandela also exchanged ideas with other global titans of justice. He cited Martin Luther King Jr. as an inspiration, recognizing the shared struggle against social oppression in America and South Africa. He learned from the mistakes and successes of other post-colonial leaders, seeking a path that could avoid the chaos and retribution that followed independence in countries like Zimbabwe. International solidarity was crucial. The global anti-apartheid movement, student protests, economic boycotts, and diplomatic pressure isolated the regime and made a continued minority rule untenable. Nelson Mandela became a symbol for freedom fighters everywhere, but he never forgot the price of international acceptance. He knew that to avoid the fate of Haiti, South Africa would need to reassure Western powers and investors that the interest would not be wiped out overnight. Now let's look into what I call the unfinished revolution, the cost of compromise. And this is really different from what I did in terms of analysis compared to IT and the unfinished revolution. Because, the revolution of the ANC led to Nelson Mandela's presidency from 1994 to 1999. It brought hope and reconciliation, but also left deep structural inequalities intact. The negotiated settlement that ended apartheid was in many ways a truth rather than a true revolution. Land and wealth. Today, more than 70% of South Africa farmland remains in white hands. The black majority continues to face high unemployment, poverty, and limited access to quality education and healthcare. It still exists an economic apartheid, and as critics argue, and persist that beneath the surface of political freedom. Social tensions. The slow pace of land reform and economic transformation has fueled frustration and periodic unrest. Grassroots movements now demand more radical change, echoing the demands that were deferred in the 90s. Global perceptions. Nelson Mandela's image as a saintly reconciler sometimes obscures the realities of ongoing injustice. His compromises are celebrated abroad, but at home they are the subject of intense debate. Nelson Mandela himself acknowledged the limits of his achievements. He understood that the work of liberation was far from complete and that future generations would need to tackle the economic and social legacies of apartheid. Now let's talk about his heritage and legacy. We can say this is something in between heroism and hard choices. Nelson Mandela remained a towering figure, but his legacy is one of, I would say, pragmatism as much as heroism. It chose peace over vengeance, stability over radical transformation, and compromise over confrontation. These choices spared South Africa the horrors of civil war and international isolation, as Haiti had suffered for hundreds of years. Yet they also felt the deep wounds of apartheid only partially healed. Nelson Mandela's example challenges us to think critically about the cost and benefits of compromise in the face of injustice. Was it better to preserve peace, even if it meant leaving some wrongs unrighted? Or should true justice demand more, regardless of the risk and the cost? What is certain is that Nelson Mandela's leadership was shaped by a profound understanding of history, a willingness to learn from the tragedies of others, and a relentless commitment to unity. As we could see as well for Patrice Lumumba, Thomas Sankara, and actually Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and also Malcolm X. By the end of his life, that's what he understood, that unity was the key for everything. His story is a reminder that the path to freedom is never simple and never easy, by the way, and that the choices that we make in pursuit of justice can define a nation for generations. Now, as we reach the conclusion and we close this Pan-Africanist chapter of our History Titan series. Naturally, we'll continue the History Titan series, but we'll venture into a new direction. Nonetheless, it is an important conclusion because it ends this chapter of the Pan-Africanist approach. So Nelson Mandela's journey stands, for the end of that chapter as both a culmination and a profound reflection on the struggle for liberation across the continent and for the Black diaspora. Nelson Mandela's choices remind us of the immense burden carried by those who lead movements for justice. Indeed, balancing the true dream of freedom with the harsh reality of what they're seeing before their eyes, that pursuing justice at any cost can sometimes mean risking the very lives of those we seek to uplift. Indeed, his path was marked by painful compromise and was shaped by the need to preserve a fragile peace and avoid the catastrophic violence that has too often followed revolutions elsewhere. Throughout the series, from Thomas Sankara, Revolutionary Integrity, Patrice Lumumba's Pan-African Vision, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., unwavering faith in nonviolence, to Malcolm X's transformation towards unity and nonviolence, we have seen the greatest victory in the struggle for liberation have always been anchored in unity and nonviolence. These beacons have guided leaders through the darkest moments, reminding us that the ultimate goal is not just the end of oppression, but the forging of a community where all can thrive together. As we reflect on the lessons of unity and nonviolence from the Pan-African liberation movements, our thoughts naturally extend to all those suffering from injustice today, whether on the Iranian side, the Israeli side, or amongst our Palestinian brothers and sisters. The pain and loss endured in these regions remind us that the path of division and violence only deepens wounds and prolongs suffering. May the spirit of unity, justice, and friendship that guided the Titans we have honored, Sankara, Lumumba, King, Malcolm X, and Mandela, one day embrace these lands as well. Let us hope that the future brings reconciliation, mutual respect, and the healing power of peace to all people, so that dignity and humanity prevail over conflict and despair. As we all have something in common, as I always say, we share this beautiful planet, this richness of diversity that we have. We need to cherish it. So can we still say that and see that liberation is a path towards unity? The answer, echoed in the lives of these Titans, is a resounding yes. True liberation is not merely the breaking of chains, but the joining of hands across nations, races, and histories. in the shared pursuit of dignity, justice, and peace. The legacy of these leaders challenges us to keep building bridges, to seek reconciliation and over revenge, and to remember that the most enduring revolutions are those that unite rather than divide. So on this, I will leave you guys on that note. Thanks very much for those who have followed all the episodes of the History Titan series. I really appreciate that. And I'll see you in about 2 weeks when we'll venture into a new direction. In the meantime, I'll see you next week for those who are following as well the Missing 411 and Skinwalker Ranch series.